There are millions of acres of opportunity out there. They belong to you. Every day, decisions are being made that affect your land, your water, your wildlife. You should know about them. This is your mountain. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Your Mountain Podcast. I am your host, David Wilms. I've got the one, the only Mike McGrady. I bet there are a lot of Mike McGrady's in the phone book, but the one, the only.
Is there a phone book anymore is the question.
I just dated myself.
I bet we could Google some.
Yeah.
We could Google up some Mike McGrady's.
When I moved to Wyoming,
check on
at some
Facebook
point
right
we
now.
had it was a grandkid in the family or something like that with the wife's family, and he couldn't sit up high enough. I was like, well, just grab a phone book, because when I grew up, it was at least 4 inches thick, and it was a good addition, and they all kind of laughed at me like, what the heck is your problem? It's more of a leaflet.
Yeah, there's not much to it anymore.
No.
And that other voice you heard, by the way, is Nephi.
Yeah, I'm gonna
Nephi
see.
Cole's here.
Yeah, I'm gonna see how many Mike McGrady's I can become friends with on Facebook right now.
Just
gonna start asking.
There are probably a few of them
just
out
searching for Mike McGrady's and then friend.
Yeah, that's the mission of everybody out there.
Yep, I'm doing it.
Yeah. So we have not done one of these in a while.
Yeah,
Right?
it's true. It's true.
And for those of you that follow us on social media, you'd know the reason why. Those of you that don't, are like, why haven't we had episodes pop up?
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah. Well, they've abandoned us.
Well, we don't
or you've abandoned us. We don't have anybody left listening.
Well, we don't get paid for this, so
But the deal is,
quit complaining.
we don't make a bunch of money doing this.
You're
and,
freeloaders.
And we wanted to go hunt.
When Dave posted the back whatever date was October 29th, gone hunting
Or 20,
right?
Yeah,
We
29.
had yeah. Basically, it was a little sign on social media that said, "Gone hunting. Don't expect a podcast."
See you someday.
The first person to love that was my wife. She was the first one to be on there, like, I love it.
Was she loving the fact that we were hunting, or was she loving the fact that we weren't going to be doing this for a while?
I think it's the podcast.
She's not here tonight, so
No,
she
she's
doesn't
not.
have any idea how bad
She
this
flew
is.
out of town, so I'm playing Mr. Mom.
All right, so we've been gone for several weeks.
Mm-hmm.
We've all been doing our various hunts.
Mm-hmm.
What have you guys done?
I started the season off dove hunting with you, and then I took my two daughters antelope hunting. Got an antelope, took them out plinking, and then did some sage grouse hunting while you guys were antelope hunting, and took the oldest daughter deer hunting with your daughter and you.
Yeah, me being
Dave.
Yeah.
I'm pointing. People can
People
see
can
it.
see the point
People
through
can see the point.
Yeah.
Well, if they've listened before, they know
that
we hunt.
that Nephi does his own thing. So
Yes.
Nephi,
Nephi.
what did you do?
I elk hunted on the moon. It wasn't very effective.
The moon.
No, we went to the area we went to, just no elk, but beautiful, beautiful country. Spent about a week up there, and it was crazy how much just weather and snow. We were horseback hunting.
Because when you say
Insane.
the moon, Dave and I hunted on the moon when we went deer
Dude.
hunting, because
We
we
did
went
hunt on
to
the
where,
moon.
if you remember the episode where we talk about his mountain where it burned, that's where we went.
Yeah, well,
And it was like the moon.
It burned thoroughly.
Yes.
I was in some beautiful country, but it was just we were really high, and it just didn't turn out. And then we saw one bull, and he was too far away to care to try. And then let's see. But last week I went with a friend.
So it can happen.
It can.
There is a too far for Nephi.
There is. Apparently, it's someplace past a kilometer. No, man, it was way out there. There's just no way. Like it was a long ways. But he,
But you did the math.
I ranged it. I mean,
I don't even have a rangefinder that
like I had
shoots
like
out that
when you
far.
had like the two, like the devil and the angel on your shoulders. Both of them said, "No, that's a stupid idea." They agreed. Like you're idiots. Just could keep watching through your binoculars, idiots.
Yeah.
No, it was a lot of fun. And then I had a friend who's I've been a hunter mentor for about 3 years, so I got to spend a few days with him up in some country, and we were able to get him his first elk, and that was pretty cool. That's gratifying because you hunt hard, and then coming towards the end of the hunt to finally get into a herd and close the distance, and we got him a shot that it was a good shot. Shot like I always say. For you, Dave, who wants to make fun of me for thinking that shooting super far. I don't. Number one.
I know.
But number
you don't.
two, I know that when you get people who you keep people within their capacity. So we were able to get him close enough to where his capacity met up with the elk that he wanted to get, and he's able to put that on the ground, and we packed it out of the mountains and threw it in the back of the truck and drove from 11 p.m. all night long to get back to help my wife out because, believe it or not, my dog had some issues. So I got a text from my wife when I was on top of the mountain. Did I tell you this?
Yeah, you
she
told
texted
me about this.
She's like, something's wrong with the dog. She had to take him to the vet. This dog had eaten at doggy daycare. She took him to doggy daycare one day so he could play with his friends. He somehow gets through the artificial turf and then just eats a gut full of road base.
This is the dog that
same dog
ate your phone.
Same dog.
Yeah. We were trying to record a podcast and you couldn't come because of that.
Yeah.
Dog
Because the
ate
dog
your
ate
phone.
your phone.
Murphy may have not been like the right choice for a name. I'm just
No, I think that's perfect.
he's good today though. He's good.
Good.
So before Dave gets to his story, because I know he's got a good one.
I do.
Yeah. I assume you're going to tell it.
I don't know which story you're talking
Well,
about. But
okay. So we were up deer hunting on the mountain, and I thought I had a great story because
this one.
Yeah. So I took my daughter up a certain sort of route while Dave took a different route with his daughter. We were up deer hunting for mule deer, and we get to this point where like Dave and his daughter haven't showed up, and I'm okay. Well, just maybe they're a different draw. Maybe they came up a different way than I'm anticipating. And so I get up to this spot, and these two deer come flying out of the timber, and so much so I like lift the rifle up instantaneously, and I look, no antlers, and I have to pull the rifle into my chest to pull it away because he was running at me, and I almost got bowled over by a deer, and my daughter's standing behind me, like 3 feet behind me, like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that thing almost ran you over, oh my goodness. And so I thought I had the greatest story ever.
Oh yeah.
Dave never shows up. Eventually we come find him.
Yeah, it turns out my story was better. Yeah.
Dave was sitting in a pile of human excrement.
No, I'd taken my daughter, and we had this.
Yeah.
We were going to meet up, kind of high up on this point, and I didn't show up, and that's because I got into some timber, and we were in this burn,
Which is the same. I almost walked over to that timber.
Yeah.
To check it out. Go ahead.
because it was the only the fire jumped this timber, and so there's this area of 10 acres that didn't burn, right? And so I just told my daughter, I'm like, we're going to go in there. There might be something bedded down in there, and we get in there, and sure enough, there were a couple things bedded down. 2 elk jumped up, walked right at us, stopped 30 yards away, and we were in a stare down with these 2 bulls, small bulls, for a couple of minutes before they just kind of wandered off. And then we started wandering again, and we hadn't gone 30 seconds when it sounded like a tree was falling in the timber. Like it just, you hear the noise, and you look, and you're expecting to see a tree crash, but instead it was a bear that jumped down out of the tree at about 20, 25 yards and just gave us the death stare. Like the get the hell out of here stare.
This male was mad at you.
That's what I thought. I'm like, this is the biggest boar I have ever seen up there. Black bear. We're not in grizzly country here, but big black bear. But this is the biggest boar I've ever seen, and I don't have a license on me. I wasn't actually. I wouldn't have done anything. I wasn't actually sure if the season was open, if the quota had been met there yet. But then my daughter. We're frozen there. Freeze my daughter there for, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 seconds, maybe more, as we're trying to figure out, how we're going to get out of this situation. And then she says, Daddy, she's 11. She says, Daddy, there's another bear. I'm like, what? There's not another bear.
No.
And
That's not how that works.
Yeah.
Boars are alone.
Boars are alone. But sows sometimes are accompanied by cubs. And this one happened to be a sow accompanied by cubs. And so turns out there were 2 more cubs that came down out of that tree. And we just had this.
Suddenly it's mom and 2 bears.
Suddenly it's mama and 2 cubs, and mama's protecting those cubs. And my daughter was awesome. She did everything correctly. She didn't panic. She stayed close to me. We got ourselves a safe distance. I thought about taking a selfie, but didn't.
Yeah.
And then we got ourselves a safe distance and watched that bear until it decided which way it was going to go, and then we went the other way. So that
which
was
would
pretty cool.
explain why I'm on top of the mountain going, "Where's Dave?"
Yeah.
And
So-
we eventually found you by coming to find you.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
we decided we were just not going to go that way.
Yeah.
Um,
And amazingly enough, your daughter and my daughter were very good about staying on the mountain that night. Granted, we were a whole nother mountain over, but
Right.
they didn't. I really thought that once that story came out, we were going home that night. I thought we were packing up.
But we made it into a.
Because there was concern that the previous night, earlier in the day, about everything we saw was alleged to be a predator out to kill us. Like, oh, is that a bear? Oh, is that a wolf or something?
And you finally got one.
we finally got one,
and
yeah.
like, oh no, you're fine. And we saw sign all over,
Right.
and so I thought for sure there was no way they would be comfortable with sleeping the night on the mountain, and we did.
Well, I think what we did was we really talked it up. Like, what a big deal it was
Oh,
to
yeah.
see them, and like a lot of people go a long time without seeing bears or having an encounter like that.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
what a cool story it was for them to have and an experience to have. So
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
think once we built that up, they were mostly okay.
Yeah.
Mostly okay. But the rest of the summary of the hunting season from my perspective is, so we didn't get anything on that deer hunt.
Right.
And I get mad when I don't get things.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had a weather event come in, and I decided to take a day trip back over there.
Yeah.
And I got myself a buck,
Mm-hmm.
little 4x5. Got an antelope.
I had 3 meetings that day, so I could not get out of it.
I did call you the day before and,
Yeah.
or sent you a text and said, hey, let's go. I'll drive.
Yeah,
Okay,
I
can't
appreciated
go.
that. Now, if you would have said, hey, I'm going to my super secret spot that it's only 30 minutes from town, I would have said
You'd have
yes.
gone.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll go buy a General Tag.
Yeah. So got a deer, got an antelope, went out elk hunting, and kind of had a blizzard push us off the mountain. Saw lots of elk, but didn't close the deal.
Well, I'm
Going-
glad
The weather has not been
going,
good.
It's not. Going back tomorrow though.
Oh, man.
yeah, we're ahead of weather.
Ahead of
Yeah,
weather.
So you can get snowed in again.
The last time,
This time I'm trying to get snowed in.
yeah, you were there before snow, and
Yeah.
fortunately, James was there to talk you off the mountain.
Yeah, otherwise
this time,
I would have
you
stayed.
are not taking James, and you're going to go into a snowstorm.
Yeah, I mean it's an anticipatory attack.
So this could be the last recording.
Oh, but Dave! Can we keep going, though, if he's without Dave?
We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll do one
Yeah,
more.
we're supposed to get a pretty nasty storm here, and
Yeah.
and it's supposed to start tomorrow night, and so I'm trying to get out of here before it starts, so I get snowed
Bad
in
luck.
on the mountain.
Bad luck.
Yeah. So if you don't hear from me by the middle of next week-ish,
Yeah.
I'm still probably okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'll still
Dude.
see you.
Yeah.
You'll still bring your kids over for Halloween.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I do have one last thing to tell Nephi, and I probably should. I'm reluctant to tell him this because he always gives me
Is it
so
about-
much crap about my cheapness.
Oh, okay.
But
it's not what I thought. Okay, go ahead.
I have a new cheapness thing that I've discovered. You might appreciate this.
I'm sure I will.
So
No one is going to believe it, but go ahead.
So on this last elk hunt, I wanted to be flexible because of the storm coming in, so I wanted to sleep in my truck. And you don't even see where this is going.
I don't even know. I
got a truck
There's
with-
so many places it could go
I've
right
got a
now.
truck with a topper on it, and it can be kind of uncomfortable. It's not set up to be a sleeper,
Yeah.
It's not a sleeper
I'm
truck,
following
right?
you.
So I had to do some last second conversion, and it turns out I've held on to the mattress of a futon I had in college, which happens to fit perfectly in the bed of that truck.
That's insulation right there.
It's
All
also
that-
it's also a 4-inch thick mattress.
Yeah.
You had it in college, right?
to
Yeah.
go on top of the 4 inches of cardboard you've had there for
Yeah.
a decade.
Yeah, well, that cardboard is to protect the bed because I didn't want to pay for
The
a
disturbing
liner.
thing is that I've heard
Rhino cardboard.
Yeah, I got a quote. It was like $800 to have that liner put in. I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm just going to use cardboard.
I've heard enough about your college experience, though, that there's like no way you're the only person that slept on that futon. That's a little creepy. I mean,
I will neither confirm nor deny this, but
family.
But
show.
I thought you would find it amusing.
I didn't say anything else. I was just like I
don't-
just had some unsavory people around.
I don't own the frame of the mattress anymore. That broke years ago.
Yeah.
Why did you keep the mattress? And it's not a mattress if it's a futon.
It is. It's not a
just
nice
like a-
futon. It's
it's
one
like
of
a
those
puffy
Remember
thing.
those cheap ones in college that were wood futons that sat close
Yeah, no,
to
I'm
the
talking
ground and
about the
folded out?
mattress. I'm talking
Yeah,
about
and the mattress that goes over that.
It's not a mattress.
It is for the purposes of putting it in a truck. What
well-
would you call it?
Padding.
An oversized dog bed.
It's about
That's
about right.
I mean,
Hey.
I get it.
Good for you.
It's apropos.
Hey.
I get it.
There's nothing wrong with that.
that was just to be adaptable. So if it got too much snow there, I could move to another location without having to tear down a tent or anything.
No worries.
That's a good idea. For what you're doing, that's a good idea.
I've been nearly equally cheap.
All right.
Hey, so I see that your buddy Kyle Lamb was running into
Kanye,
a famous dude. Cody
That was on our elk
Kanye.
hunt.
the
That
new
was-
Wyoming resident.
That was like so we were up. That was up on
were
our
you
elk
on
hunt.
that on your elk
Yeah.
hunt? Did you
So we
run
were-
into Kanye?
No, I
He's
came
not an
back.
elk hunter?
I came back 2 days
So you
before
came
the
back.
rest of the
Okay.
group.
So yeah, I saw.
So
I
he
saw-
met. So Kyle stayed. He had some business in town with his wife.
Okay.
She flew in, and so they were at the. But yeah, it's kind of funny.
So
funny.
so you know what the connection to the Your Mountain podcast is?
What's that?
Kanye bought the Monster Lake Ranch
Yes.
outside
Yes,
Cody.
and
If you go to the Your Mountain website, you will see a picture of me holding a fish I caught off Monster Lake.
Are you? That's where it was.
Yeah. And it wasn't the biggest fish I caught that day, but that was a really good fishery.
Yeah.
So when it came up for sale, I was like, oh, it'd be great to buy that. It'd be great to buy that. But it was more than I would pay.
yeah, it was so
more than I
fun.
could afford. So then Kanye West buys the ranch. So now the biggest
I'll bet
question
he'll write
is,
you a
can-
permission
He
slip
got in
That's-
trouble. Did you see he got in trouble with the
Yeah.
game
for
and fish?
harassing wildlife.
Like I'm sure that the game and fish guys didn't want to have to write that ticket, but they kind of
they didn't write a ticket. They
No,
gave
they
a
just
warning.
gave him a warning. But like
Yeah.
it's one of
It's
those
like,
things
okay.
where it's like
Not
it was so
cool.
public from everyone else that he's like they go, well, we got to do something. Let's tell him not to do that again.
Yeah. So I got to figure out how to get out there and get permission again to go. I was
So,
out there
yeah,
for like a
I know-
fundraiser or something.
I may or may not have some interesting connections.
All right, get me back out there because
Yeah.
Emily and I went fishing. My wife and I went fishing.
I'm going,
out there
by the way,
and
with may not.
may not have.
No,
Just because you know a guy that took a picture with him doesn't get
No,
give
there's
you
a-
a
there's
connection
a-
to the ranch.
So that was random, but there's another guy that I was hunting with who's a fantastic individual, Darren, who does not listen to this podcast. Shout out to Darren.
Why'd you
and,
just shout out somebody that doesn't listen?
Because he's never going to listen. So if he listened, I'd probably be more weird about it. But he's just a really neat dude who, anyway, part of our hunting group. Who's the connection there. The reason that everybody knew he was in town, and then Kyle knew he was in town, is because he's doing some building there. Kanye is, and Darren
He
happens
just
to be in the
bought a
construction
building.
world.
He bought a building.
They're doing a
too.
bunch of stuff.
Well,
They're
they bought a
Yeah.
lot
they're legit.
that they were going to put a building on.
Right.
downtown. Yeah, I read that in the paper today about. Well, I saw Kyle on Facebook, and then I read in the paper about the purchase, and then it confirmed that he bought the ranch. And I was like, I've been there.
Yeah, he's
fished
a
that
like.
lake.
Yeah,
That's
he's
awesome.
Yeah.
No,
No,
that's a small world, right?
Yeah, exactly. So did I tell you I know Kanye West? Or I caught a fish off the ranch he bought
Yeah.
a decade later.
Yeah.
I know
Okay.
a guy who knows.
I know. Yeah.
There you go.
So I have no connection.
So
All
here's
right.
a funny story though. Like, I hope he doesn't get mad at me for telling this, but the funny thing was, so Kyle wanted to meet Kanye, and so he didn't, of course, know him, and so he texted Don Jr., who then let Kanye know that Kyle Lamb wanted to get a selfie with him.
So Kyle Lamb
Isn't
got
that
a
a
hold
great story?
of Donald Trump Jr. Donald Trump Jr. got a hold of Kanye. This is a bizarre world.
This
This is a bizarre. Welcome to Wyoming.
That's
That's a small.
That's not a Wyoming story. I mean, it sort of
I
happened
know.
within the borders of the state.
That's-
That's
It just
a
happened to
weird
happen.
story.
Yeah.
Hey, should we talk about other stuff?
Yeah, we might as well.
So
Yeah.
we've been gone for a while,
Yeah.
and we'll try and keep this short and sweet. We've been kicking around ideas for topics, and we've got some ideas that some of you listeners have sent in, and some really good topic ideas, and we're trying to track down good guests to help with some of the ideas that are floating around. In the meantime, they're in the Western United States in particular, and I know we have a lot of listeners in the West, but we have listeners all over the country.
Right.
But in the Western United States right now, one of the big hot topics in the wildlife world is around migration corridors of, so the migration pathways
Right.
of large ungulates. Now, we're not talking about that specifically. We'll weave some things in about that. But one of the controversies around these, and we've seen it in Colorado, New Mexico, in Wyoming, principally in the states that have a lot of oil and gas development, is what happens when you have a migration corridor and then there are oil and gas leases within those corridors.
Leasing specifically. right?
Leasing specifically.
Yeah.
And so we thought it might be beneficial, rather than getting too much in the weeds on that piece of it, but it might be beneficial for people to know how the federal leasing program works, like how federal minerals are leased. The process by which they're leased, the royalties associated with them, and how that fits into the bigger picture of public lands management. So we thought we'd spend a little bit of time today talking about how that process works.
Sure. What can you just step back a second and explain very briefly the existence of federal minerals?
The mere fact that they exist.
Right.
Yeah. And what they are. Sure. So, excuse me, I'm about to cough. Just wanted to give everybody a heads up.
Yeah.
That's the other thing that's happened this month is I've been sick
Yeah, thanks
for
a lot,
most
Dave.
of the month, and I'm just
Thanks a
finally
lot.
getting over it. I'm just in the lung butter phase.
I know.
Yeah.
I got your cold like a week after that, so thanks.
You're welcome.
I didn't. What'd you do? All right, go ahead.
Okay. So think of federal minerals in two contexts. So the federal government reserved mineral rights in two ways. So they have, you hear the conversation about there are whatever it is 670 million acres of public lands in the western or in the country, right? And the federal government retained, along with the surface rights there, retained the subsurface rights to all of the minerals underlying those lands. But also as part of was it the Homestead Act? I don't know if it was for sure the Homestead Act or if it was a later iteration, not the original Homestead Act, but amendments of the Homestead Act. Anyway, at some point, there also land that people own, citizens own the surface in fee title, as in they own the surface rights, but the federal government retained the subsurface rights on those lands. And those are federal minerals as well. And I don't think that was under this is where I'm going to get myself out of my comfort zone here, but I don't think it doesn't matter which
So
act
people
it was.
understand that there are lands out there that are private lands, but they don't control anything under the surface that belongs to the federal government.
And the federal government was picky about what minerals it would allow to go. So there was a point in time where we got the Louisiana Purchase. They buy everything that was the top, the bottom, the center of the earth, all the way to the starry decked heavens, right? From France. And that came with it everything under the sun. And so when they sold off those lands to manifest destiny, those folks that were trying to settle the West, they didn't always give them everything. They withheld as a federal sort of mineral, like, okay, we'll give you this land, but we're not going to give you the coal because we know coal is good. But there were a lot of minerals that they weren't so sure on. And there were a lot of minerals they thought, you know what, we could sell it. And then what that will do is that will spur the potential for development. If we sell it and someone comes out and prospects and speculates for oil, for whatever mineral there is today, it's some of those precious things that go into your cell phones. It's always been a system where we kind of, the things we know about, the federal government's going to keep a hold of. They're still going to sell it. They're going to sell it as theirs rather than sell the whole land with it.
Well, and there's other things mixed in there too, because kind of some of what you were talking about were things like the Mining Act of 1872, and there's the ability to prospect through that. But there, so that would be something that the federal state has, but created a process through the Mining Act of 1872 to allow for prospecting of certain things, but that didn't include oil and gas.
Right.
That was hard rock stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Gold, silver, copper, all
and
those.
Oil and gas and coal
traditional
were dealt with separately.
Right, yeah. Yeah, your traditional mine shaft Willie.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's kind of the landscape, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does this work? So I'll start this off, and then everybody jump in and correct me and whatnot. But let's look at it like this. So take a map and let's just focus on the Western United States for simplicity purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So take a map of the Western United States, and you have the mineral estate that's subsurface could have the split estate issues, but think about the land ownership there. So you have some private land, you have National Forest, you have Bureau of Land Management, you have National Park Service, you have U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and all of those can have federal minerals underlaying them. And through a series of other federal laws, some of those lands, like National Park Service land and lands underlying wilderness areas because of the Wilderness Act, have been removed from
development.
So they cannot be leased. So what we have is
patchwork.
We have patchwork. Now, for leasing purposes, when I say so that the federal government wants to encourage multiple use of these lands, one of the things, so you have the Leasing Act of 1920, I think is what it was.
Mineral Leasing Act 1920, yeah.
Mineral Leasing Act that set up the process by which people that want to develop on the public resource sets up the process for how to do that. And frankly, for the most part, that process that was set up in 1920 is what we're still operating under today. So here's how mineral leasing would work. Well, let me add one more thing really quick. So we have that process that was set up, and then in 1976 we have FLTMA, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just reluctant to say we always mess that up, but
Federal Land Policy Management Act.
There we go. Anyway,
that may be the first time I got that right in my life.
But that act required so not just FLTMA, but also NIFMA, National Forest Management Act, requires planning, resource management plans and forest plans over a long term. Right? You have to plan for the multiple uses of the landscape, including what areas you might remove from leasing, and areas that you might encourage leasing.
Right.
And that's all laid out in these long-term planning documents. So that's important to know.
Long-term being supposedly 20 years.
Supposedly 20 years.
Well, supposedly 10, but really 20 to 30.
Yeah, right. And they can be amended and so forth, but the amendments take time, right? So that's in there. So now you know that. So let's go back to, okay, how does this process work? So you have a management plan that lays out places that can be leased, places that are off limits. What happens? Well, first of all, anybody can go in and nominate a parcel to be leased. There are caps. I think it's around roughly 2,500 acres, give or take some amount. That's a maximum parcel that can be offered for lease.
Size of the parcel.
The size of the specific parcel is capped.
640 acres being a square mile.
Correct.
Okay, so 2,500.
So
is the maximum
roughly
size.
just over 4 square miles,
Right,
is the
yeah.
maximum size per parcel. Now, it doesn't mean that you can only have one parcel for
at a time.
lease.
Yeah, you can have a bunch of
You
different
can have
parcels
a
in the
bunch
same
of
lease.
Yeah, exactly.
A whole basin.
So anybody can nominate a parcel to be leased. Then the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, is the one that really oversees the leasing program.
Even if it's
Forest Service.
Right, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So BLM is running that, overseeing the leasing program.
That's their expertise.
Correct. So parcels nominated, BLM then does an analysis on that parcel. I think the general idea is it's supposed to have some development potential. They're looking at it from a geology standpoint for one, but then they're also going to do an EA, environmental assessment on the potential parcel to see is there some reason why this would have an adverse effect on the human environment if this were offered for lease. And they typically don't have to do a full-blown environmental impact statement. It sits with the environmental assessment. They have to do that. Once they do that, and I won't get into all the
Yeah, you just skipped over like 6 months worth of work.
right.
At least 6 months.
Right.
Yeah, just
Like we're just trying to hit
Yeah.
the big picture here, right? So we're not going to go into all the nuances and the protest periods and all that sort of stuff. Just saying generally this
Big
is what
picture.
happens. Big picture of what happens.
There's a big assessment of the potential, what minerals are there, what do we know about, what's happened in the past. Are there any particular things that would prohibit the lease? Many times these are the Bureau of Land Management is working with the states and saying, hey, do you got any problems? State wildlife agencies, state mineral agencies, state land agencies, just to try to kind of coordinate.
Right. Okay, so they go through and they've got they have parcels nominated for lease. They go through that whole process, and then they're going to offer them up for lease, and it's done through a competitive bidding process. Now, the competitive bidding process used to be in person,
Right.
like an in-person auction. You had to show up and
Yes.
be in the room, and it was like an auction
So
for the leases.
And that's a fairly recent phenomenon.
Within the past 5 years, it's changed.
Well, I remember when it changed.
Yeah.
I was working in the governor's office when it changed, because it went from you could sit and watch Joe, who he works for, or Jane, who she works for, and say, okay, what are they doing over there? What are they bidding on? How much are they doing? What are they
And
looking
why?
for?
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of in-person analysis that could happen. And suddenly it went to an online platform. And as that transition occurred, I remember being in countless meetings about what's that mean? How are you going to do that? And, my first reaction is, how can I find a building closest to the node of the server next to where
It's in China.
It's
in China.
So the company,
Or the Ukraine.
the company that does it, I was trying to figure out how you could beat out the next competitor by a millisecond. I was thinking, okay, we could figure this out, right? That was just what was running through my head. But yeah, so we just within the last 3 years have transitioned from hold a paddle up to online eBay style auctioning.
Right. Yeah. And people can be spread out all over the country.
Yeah.
And it opens
Or
up
world.
and it opens
Yeah.
up to some speculation. And it also, it's resulted in increased revenue for sure from lease sales. Because it's just much easier.
I remember the Bureau of Land Management in Wyoming was watching the state of Wyoming adopted that and went with the same company before him. And so they were kind of watching what Wyoming was doing to see if that was going to work.
And you're saying, Wyoming, you're saying on state lands in Wyoming.
State land in Wyoming, yeah.
'cause they
actual
lease state lands.
State stuff.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out, is this going to work? How's this going to look? And then how to magnify that and expand that on a bigger BLM style scale, statewide scale.
So that's how that works. You have a sorry, Mike just tapped Nephi on the
I'm
head
not
because
asleep,
Nephi's
I just got my
falling
head
asleep.
down.
He's so bored by this conversation. So you have this online bidding system, and the way it works from a competitive standpoint is there's a statutory minimum bid that was set in 1920. I don't know if that was actually set then or later, but it's been around for a long time. The minimum bid.
It's been around long enough that some folks question whether it matches the current market.
Yeah,
it makes dollar sense.
So the minimum bid is $2 an acre.
Okay.
So the statutory minimum is $2 an acre. And I'm going to tell you why that's important in a second. I mean, that actually, I know Nephi's over here just.
Well, it's because there is a WOTUS component.
But it's
I'm back.
But that when we're talking about wildlife management and wildlife usage, that $2 an acre is actually really important, and I'm going to get to that in just a minute.
Okay.
But that's how it works. You have a competitive lease. The lease duration, so somebody wins the bid, they have the lease. That acreage that they win the bid on, they can lease for 10 years.
Right. And that lease is their right to go through more process to develop later.
It's the right to spec or to
maybe develop later. Well, they've got a.
The idea is
somewhat of a contractual right that can be conditioned.
Right. The idea is they buy it and they're supposed to make an effort towards trying to develop. Right?
Oh yeah. From that perspective, yeah, they're supposed to.
They're supposed to.
Yeah.
That doesn't always happen.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's their fault, and sometimes it's a process fault.
Yeah, or sometimes it just doesn't make economic sense.
Right.
So for those lands, and are there lands that don't ever get leased?
Yeah. So that's
what happens to those?
So that's the other piece of it. Okay. So the lands that are offered up for lease and aren't purchased, right? So you have a $2 an acre minimum, but maybe somebody doesn't want to spend that, and it's acres that the BLM put up.
And again, this is for mineral leasing, so everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, it's not
We're
leasing
talking
the
about,
surface.
Yeah, he doesn't give you a right to build a mansion there, or doesn't give you a right to graze there, because those are all different things that come through different leasing processes. Right. This is the right to be able to potentially extract the mineral resource.
Right.
Potentially.
Potentially.
So, and we'll get to that in a second too. So the mineral lease is, they don't say they don't sell it. It's put up for the bid. It doesn't sell. What happens then? Well, it goes to what's called a non-competitive lease, as in somebody could walk into the BLM office the day after, or for up to 2 years after that wasn't leased, and fill out the paperwork and spend $1.50 an acre and put it under lease.
Yeah. So literally walk in to the building there on Yellowstone, which is the road in Cheyenne, go through security, walk over to the map room, so you have to take a right, walk down the hall, go in and say, I'd like to, and there's a little counter there, and then write a check, and you're good to go.
Right.
Over the counter, and rather than bidding process.
Right. And so you pay this lease, you pay that per acre, and that's good for 10 years, and then you have to pay rental fees on that every year. And it's whether you went through a competitive process or a non-competitive process, for the first 5 of those 10 years, it's $1.50 an acre per year in rent. And the second 5 years, it's $2 an acre of rent that you have to pay every year until you develop it and the royalties produced. So royalties meaning you drill a well, it produces oil.
Paying quantities?
Right. What I'm saying is,
yeah. Well, enough oil that you make money so that you then pay.
Enough oil. I don't. You might have to correct me on this. I thought it was if you're producing oil that you're able to sell, you have to pay 12.5% royalty on that to the federal government. And when that 12.5% royalty to the federal government exceeds the amount that you're paying in your rental every year, then the rental fee goes away and you're just paying the royalty. Or you never pay both. It's right. You only pay the royalty when it would be more than the rental.
Okay.
Right. So, and Nephi's unconscious now. He's just flat unconscious.
Well, he wants to know what's
I'm
going
trying
on
to
with
figure
you.
out how to make it more entertaining.
So we're gonna.
I'm
so
working very
sleeping
hard.
is doing that.
No, I understand in my head, but I'm like, how can I make this entertaining?
Okay, so let me just jump ahead. So
Okay.
that's how the leasing process works.
Yes.
Now let me tell you some facts on the ground of what's happened with leasing, and this is where I think it gets interesting. But I think you need to know that groundwork. So let's use Wyoming as an example. It's controversial in Wyoming because you have a number of migration corridors for mule deer and pronghorn, for example, that have been designated by the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And we're talking some of the longest migration routes in North America, or at least in the lower 48 for mule deer and for pronghorn. And they just happen to go through pretty mineral-rich country, and at least country that people are interested in buying leases on. So here's the controversy. There is a fear that if a company goes in and buys a lease, and that lease overlays or happens to occur in an area where there's a migration, an animal migration, that lease could get developed and have a negative impact on that wildlife population, right? But here's how this leasing is working, and it's, man, Nephi, you're just distracting me. You're just like unconscious over here.
I am listening very intently with my eyes closed.
Yeah, right.
Go ahead.
You just look tired. Okay, this year in 2019, so under the Mineral Leasing Act, the BLM is required to have 4 lease sales a year in states that have federal minerals, right? And if they're supposed to analyze it and make a determination of whether there's leases to be offered 4 times a year. So they've done that in Wyoming. Actually, I think it's going to be 5 times this year. And to date, in 2019, they've leased about 1.1 million acres in Wyoming. Right? Here's the fascinating part. That 1.1 million acres has generated about $61 million in revenue for the state of Wyoming. The state takes, when that lease sale goes through, the state takes about half. The federal government takes about half.
Yeah.
And so the state's made about $61 million off of lease sales alone.
Just the lease sale, not the mineral extraction. We're talking about just the opportunity.
Yep.
So this is where it's going to get challenging.
Right? Because you see where I'm going, right?
Now I'm awake.
All right. So of that, so there's 1.1 million acres that's generated $61 million, right?
Yep.
Of that, about 250,000 acres were sold at the statutory minimum of $2 an acre, which means that's pretty basic math. If you have about 250,000 acres and you're selling it at $2 an acre, and the state gets about half of that,
$1 an acre.
It means you're getting about $250,000 for what turned out to be about 22% of all the land leased. So that $2 statutory minimum, this 250,000 acres of land that's leased, generates 0.3% of all of the leasing revenue. 22% of the land area generates 0.3% of the revenue. And that's one of the areas of concern around leasing, saying, are we maybe not getting fair market value for those acres? Is the public getting their fair share out of those acres that are leased if you're only generating that much?
So is that based upon the presumption that there's a tremendous value in the lease? Or does that take into account the idea that the lease is important, but what's more important is the production?
Yeah, because
where the real dollars are.
Yeah, and I would, interestingly enough, I mean, here's the other question I have coming out of that, and I would have, because I can see what you're saying is like, well, aren't we tying, I mean, really what you're saying is, aren't we tying up all this land for no good reason? Is kind of, part of the inclination of that is like this, we're not getting much money for this land. What's the point? And the alternative to that might be, we wouldn't be getting any money off this land, and it's not being developed. all that it is the lease on it right now. So really, it's not getting touched.
But
it's just generating income.
Yeah, but for somebody sitting or saying, all right, I'll pay to sit on that and see if somebody wants to buy it off me.
Yeah.
You get $0 as far as the lease of the oil and gas potential is. That's different than grazing and all those things, as Nephi has mentioned. But yeah, I mean Dave, I'm just curious. Is that that concept of the numbers based upon the idea that the real money we're getting is the just buying the lease and sitting, or
Yeah, because on those acres that are leased at $2 an acre, the vast majority, I mean the overwhelming majority, I mean somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% or so of that acreage ever actually gets put into production.
10% of the $2 an acre.
Right.
Yeah.
So now
they're still collecting rent on that,
now
though,
if you
correct?
have-
Every year you're collecting rent. So even if you got $1.50
Yeah, but
sale, you're pulling $2 a year for rent.
But those dollars are inconsequential for
Right.
what Dave is saying. So those acres that are going for $4 an acre or something have a higher potential.
Yeah, when they go for $10 an acre,
Yeah.
it's
probably
it's
getting
something like
developed.
35 to 40% of them wind up getting developed.
Actually developed.
Because people are if somebody's going to come in and buy up these parcels and spend $10 or sometimes up to $2,000 or more dollars an acre. I mean, they're spending real money. It's because they see real potential.
Right.
And it turns out that the companies that are buying acreage at $2 an acre, when you look at their portfolio around the country,
Yeah.
you can't find a well they've ever drilled.
Right. It's Mine Shaft Willie.
Yeah, it's a speculative purchase that they're hoping to eventually leverage and sell to somebody else. Flip it somebody else for more than $2.
It's a buy and flip. And so I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying, Dave. And I also take into consideration the fear of folks that, well, okay, the leasing in the corridor might lead to development. But I also take that in with a grain of salt, recognizing that most of the time these are individuals who are never going to develop.
However,
All they're doing is throwing cash for a potential to try to flip it someday. So there's a risk, but I see it as a lower risk than as what I'm reading about.
now to throw something in the and I bet Dave's going to talk about this. Now to make this more complicated, here's the challenge. So just like we could say that maybe we don't like, somebody might say, oh, I don't like somebody leasing that because even if they're not going to, they kind of have a hold on it for development. The reality is once they do lease it, they kind of have a hold on it for development, and that precludes being able to prioritize other things.
Yeah, and that
And so
actually.
that's kind of the interesting door that's swinging both ways here.
Yeah.
So here's a point I'd make on that. And we're just using Wyoming as an example because we know the numbers pretty well here, but this is applicable to other places. I'm sure just the numbers will look different.
Yeah.
Right. The outdoor recreation economy, for example, in Wyoming is, well, a lot of people don't know. There are 2.5 times as many people employed in the outdoor recreation industry than there are employed in the oil and gas industry in the state of Wyoming. It makes up almost a quarter of the jobs in the state are directly tied to the outdoor recreation economy. That economy has grown 54% in the past 5 years. There's a study that was done when we were all at the governor's office. So the outdoor recreation economy is growing.
Thank you, Nephi.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So, it's growing. It's a huge employer, but there are limitations on how you can grow it if you have leases overlaying hundreds of thousands of acres of public land that could potentially be used for and prioritized for outdoor recreation purposes. And I'm not talking about just hunting. I mean, there are all sorts of outdoor recreation opportunities.
Sure. Horseback riding, hiking.
Bird watching.
Yeah, you
ORV
name it.
use, mountain biking.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
absolutely.
there's all kinds of stuff. And
Yeah.
and what the lease does is it creates a property interest
Correct.
for
It's
a decade.
a stick in the bundle.
Right. And on low potential production to prevent other uses or planning around other uses for low potential production creates it's an issue of an area of concern for people.
Oh, sure.
And are we potentially costing ourselves more money than we're actually making on those acres because we have this growing economy and we can't plan for other uses on what turns out to be a fairly sizable chunk of land?
I'm going to let all the listeners into a secret right now. Everybody who's listening to this. The stuff you're listening to now that's making you want to fall asleep is what we did for our careers. As we sat around desks, with numbers, we're like, checks. Yeah, so we're like, this is what we debated day in and day out. I'm like, what if we tweaked this? What if we put a line there? What about that map? What about this map? What about that animal? You know, like, how do you balance all this?
Don't you wish you had our jobs?
Yeah, right.
Oh, man.
No, you're absolutely right, though, because I know that I was looking at a few things at one point, minor issue in the grander scheme of things, but I remember looking at this particular issue in conjunction with a variety of others, and it was, Dave is absolutely right, that begs the question of that parcel, and it could be a big parcel that can overlap a migration corridor.
Yeah.
And so it can throw in some doubt. Now, that should not be interpreted to mean that if there was full development, there would necessarily be an impact, but there's a potential.
And there are opportunities for BLM or even the state with its dual permitting authority. And when I say dual permitting, I mean for purposes of oil and gas development, you have to get a permit
in Wyoming, you get a permit from both the state and the feds.
Right. So there's the ability to, even after a lease is offered, to put development stipulations upon it when they apply for a permit to drill.
Just to accommodate migration corridors.
Right.
And when I looked at it, I looked at all the layers, all of the ways in which that particular development could be impacted. And I mean, from setbacks for mule deer to setbacks or restrictions associated with sage grouse. There were, the historic trails running through there. There were issues on National Historic Preservation Act. There were issues on, there were hundreds of things that needed to be considered and accounted for before development would even be considered. So there were an infinite number of ways in which that may never happen. And if it does, almost everything was going to get accounted for.
Yeah, but to pull it off the table. So if you have a parcel or an area that could potentially be developed, and this is one of the challenges, to be frank, right? This is for real.
Are you saying it's challenging anybody?
One of the issues is if once somebody invests money at any point into the potential to develop this, it's almost like a self-licking lollipop. Because if you now concede that it cannot be developed, if you turn your head and be like, no, it's not worth anything, your investment just went away. Whereas if you sit on this and you say, no, it potentially could be developed someday, and that's why we're putting more money, you maintain its value and you have the potential to sell it later or to lease it later when you didn't before. Case in point, let's just assume, let's say there's a giant mine someplace. Somebody has a speculation they want to build a giant mine.
Say in Alaska?
No, I wouldn't necessarily. I'm going to make mine in. Wisconsin.
Maybe Minnesota, Boundary Waters area.
I don't care. Maybe. Let's make it in a.
I'm just picking the two most controversial.
It's
on
Mars.
Right,
it's on Mars.
Okay.
So I'm going to build a giant mine on Mars. So I plan exactly. So I plan this mine on Mars, and I get a bunch of investors to throw a bunch of money at this mine, and I write the big portfolio for why this mine is going to be worth so much money, it's going to produce all this stuff. As soon as I start paying for permits and I start doing work on that, it gains value so my speculation and it becomes worth more because of the work that I'm doing on it. I'm going to sell that to you. In order to sell it to you, you have to believe that there's value in this thing. As soon as you don't believe that there's any value, guess what happens to my investment? It's gone.
Craters.
And so it craters. And so some of these self-licking lollipops, you'll see why you might say, well, why would somebody invest money in my mine on Mars year after year after year? And why would people keep pushing and pushing and pushing? Well,
Total recall.
Each person, each group that comes in and starts investing increases the probability. They increase the need to keep licking that lollipop.
Yeah.
Because there's just the value, the potential value gets greater and greater, and at some point, it either becomes something, or somebody loses a lot of money, and that's a reality with some of these
That's a
things.
fascinating sort of piece, because I know I've always approached it from the sort of concept of that the doom and gloom spelled as it relates to some of these migration corridors. Is that it is a slippery slope. Well, if you lease, that clearly means, and then that clearly means, and that,
Well, and
right?
the reason they say that is because under the law, if you lease, you're only supposed to lease parcels that there's a
Yes, absolutely.
likelihood of developing. Right?
Absolutely, you're absolutely
So
right.
if you
That
read the law the way it's written,
And no one
But-
would ever.
And if you
I'm just
looked
pointing
into
that out.
reality, you would understand that that's okay. That's not necessarily true. But from Nephi's perspective, that's a very different sort of slippery slope, where it has the potential for something that probably has no minerals or no value or no real.
Or it's just
sort of
difficult to extract,
where
or the technology's not there, or
Well,
whatever
and let's make
else.
sure
It's
we're clear that we're
snowballs.
talking about oil and gas,
Correct.
because we're talking about oil, gas, coal is what we're focused on here on the leasing,
Mhm.
because minerals, in the context of hard rock and so
Okay.
forth, are
Yeah, I see where you're going.
treated differently. So I just don't want to mix concepts
Oh
here.
yeah, placer mines and all those. Yeah, there's a whole.
Right.
So yeah, no, but Nephi's interjecting a concept that I hadn't really thought about, and that was sort of a snowball effect of someone bids on something, goes get that $1.50 acre, and then
That's why you bid on it.
puts in a road. It's like, oh look, this is a road. This is gonna be something.
That's
And then-
actually not why.
And then the next guy,
Oh, Dave.
the next guy comes along. He's like, well, clearly, dummy would not have put a road in if there wasn't some potential.
Right.
And then he buys it, and then he's like, wow, I'm gonna put in a spur on this road. And then the next guy comes along and buys it because, well, it's got a road and a spur. And I think that's what he's suggesting, is that there's a potential for a snowball effect to occur,
it's
so that there is eventually enough environmental degradation, that unnecessary environmental degradation, that could have an impact on the things that we like to hunt.
I really truly just think that there's these issues. I mean, I hate to say it, but none of them are simple, and that's part of the problem. It's like every time you look at one of these, you go, "Oh, this is a piece of cake. We can figure this out by just saying no." We're probably ignoring like a whole bunch of subtle actions in the past and other people and interests that have driven this, process to where it's at, and that's what makes it hard to walk away from the way we've been doing it or what we've been okaying and saying all right to.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's not easy.
So I will say, and I hadn't even thought about it from the perspective you just presented. The argument I'd always heard was that some of these companies are coming in from a speculative standpoint to be able to prop up their portfolio to show shareholders, here's my lease portfolio,
Yeah.
and attach some value to that, which opens up some streams of capital.
God, you know what?
And
I would be surprised if that's truly happening.
I've read reports that suggest it does.
Okay, but is it happening for those that are traded on the New York Stock Exchange?
No, absolutely
Okay.
not. That's
So
not what I'm talking about.
Okay, I just wanted to
No,
make sure.
the legitimate players that go in and bid on property because they intend to drill,
yeah.
those are the ones that.
Well, yeah, you're the ones
Those
that
are
we
the ones
all
that
know.
we all know. The big companies we all know. They're
well-
not buying the acreage at $2 an acre. They're going in and spending
$2,000
$2,000 or $10,000 an acre and saying,
Well,
we're developing.
To be
this.
to be fair, the ones we all know are not buying the lease. They are buying from the mid-major who bought the lease.
That's true.
Yeah.
But the
And-
mid-majors are traded on the New York Stock Exchange.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a notch down from that, but someone who wants to pad their portfolio for the type of investor that's not buying stock on an open market necessarily. Okay.
Right. Anyway, so that's one of the things that I've always heard about it. But rather than saying this acreage simply shouldn't be available for lease, one of the conversations I've heard, and I mentioned, and this is why I want to circle back around to the $2 an acre piece. You say, well, most of it's not being developed anyway, and so Yeah, it's tying it up from other uses, but that was a dollar amount that was set decades ago at $2 an acre.
Mm-hmm.
And is it maybe fair to say that the American public isn't getting their fair share, or not fair share, but fair market value out of those acres? And perhaps if you increase the minimum bid on acreage, you might have some land that goes unleased because people are going to be unwilling to pay $5 or $7 an acre to speculate. But you might actually make more money as a state and the federal government. And there's actually a GAO, so Government Office of Accountability report that goes through this and actually did the math and did the analysis and suggests that, you'd probably lease fewer acres,
but you'd make more
money off the acres you leased, and you'd have a straight-faced argument that the American public is actually receiving fair market value for the land being leased.
Yeah, it's an interesting exercise, right? Because you don't really know till you do it.
Right. And it actually, what's funny is there are several bills in the past couple of Congresses that have been introduced. They haven't gone anywhere, but they've been introduced. And some of them have been bipartisan to do just that. Yet, that's not actually necessary. It's in the statutory minimum is $2. There's no cap on what the minimum should be. The administration could regulatorily increase.
Mm-hmm. And they have tried in a variety of contexts.
Not in this administration.
Not in this administration. The preceding administration
That's
attempted
right.
to do that in the coal context.
They did.
And then they got really hammered for trying.
And they just got reversed by a district court. But yeah, no, that's absolutely right. And just to wonk a little bit, the Government Accountability
because we haven't wonked at all yet.
The Government Accountability Office that Dave mentioned is an independent group under Congress.
Right.
And so, we have mentioned before about various bills that have to go through and they need to get scored to determine budgetary impacts. And so that is one of the entities involved in that. So for what that is worth.
Right.
Because they're looking at me like, why are you talking?
No, I think that's good information to share.
Yeah.
And the other piece, and we won't go into this, but I'm about to just very, very briefly, and then we'll probably just wrap this up. Mm-hmm. We've talked all about the leasing side. We haven't talked anything about the royalty side.
Oh yeah.
And there actually some debate on the royalty side too, and that's more about royalties. If the development happens, royalties are going to be paid. Right. That's what's going to happen. Right. It's a question of, is the royalty rate an appropriate number right now?
For who?
Is it appropriate? So
for the American public.
For the American public. And we won't go into this, but I'll lay this out just for people to think about. So when I was in private practice and doing work for landowners on oil and gas leasing, or contracting for development of private minerals, mm-hmm. the standard rate was between 18 and 22% for royalty payment to the landowner. Sometimes a little bit lower if it was a lot more speculation going in, but it was typically in the 18 to 22% range.
Okay. On
state lands, in Wyoming it's 16.5 or 16.75%. In Texas it's 25%, mm-hmm. And it runs everything in between. It actually can be 12.5% in Wyoming potentially. There's a way to do that, to actually encourage speculation on state lands.
Right. Yeah.
But it usually starts at the 16.5 and tears down if you have to.
The whole idea.
I can't wait to argue the opposite side of this.
No, but the whole idea.
What is it right now, Dave, for the federal?
That's another whole podcast.
Yeah, we're not
on
going to do
why
that.
it could be 12.5.
We're-
Why
we're-
it's a good idea.
No, why it's a good or a bad idea. There's
Right,
two sides to
exactly.
that coin.
Sure.
But the point is, on the federal lands, it's 12.5%.
Right.
And this same GAO report suggested that if you raised that 12.5%
To 16
to the 16.5 of the state, that over a course of something like 10 years, it would generate an additional $250 to $700 million.
but here's part of the problem.
dollars for
I wanna
the
jump
state.
in here first.
It depends on which economic model you use.
It does, and
There
so
are
that's why.
two major economic models that one would say that's a terrible idea, one would say that's a great idea, and it depends on which political party you're in that you like.
Yeah, and because
that
part of it,
particular-
because if
yeah.
you say this 12 and a half, the other thing that the
Right, that's what-
realization is this: the reason that mineral companies will pay that greater royalty rate to go and develop private versus
Right, no, I
federal
know.
is because
They don't have to do the
make a lot
investment.
more. They make a lot more profit developing on private lands because they don't
Well, they
have
can
to
do it
jump through the
faster.
regulatory hoops.
Yeah, they can
exactly.
do it faster.
So, and that's something you have to. That has to be set out
That's-
right in front.
So that's the
They
argument.
make more
that's-
money on the private and they give more royalty
Right.
away. They make more money because it costs them so much money to do NEPA for a bajillion
Now
years.
that's the argument that's made.
It's the reality.
Well, it's the argument that's made, but there are a number of reports that suggest that royalty rate isn't actually the limiting factor on development. It's geology. And if you have great geology that produces a ton of oil,
Right.
you'll
The-
pay to
you'll-
be able to
you'll
get that
find-
oil.
you'll find
a way to
money.
make the money.
I think that's true, and
Yeah,
I think
but they-
geology does have a significant impact, and I think you will find, if you studied it, that the whole concern around the migration corridors and the leasing and the leasing but not developing, and a lot of that, geology plays a much bigger factor. There's a lot of lands that I've seen leased that is purely speculation. There's no oil there. We know there's no oil.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing
agreed.
but dry holes in the area. But there are people who are losing their minds that there are leases going on in the area, even though there's no
Chance of development.
There's no chance of development.
Right.
But the problem, I think the concern, which is valid, is that they're going to have to do a lot of work that disrupts the habitat to prove.
They just don't want
that
the
it's not.
threat there. They don't want
the
that
threat.
threat.
But there's the threat of the possibility that somebody
and
will
it's
put
fair.
a road in
And they don't want it locked
figure it
down
out.
to prevent
Yeah.
other uses. And that's a fair criticism too. If we know that there are dry holes and we know that there's really no oil and gas there.
Right, which comes back to the beginning of your conversation.
Right.
How do you figure that out? What are you going to do in that instance?
Right.
How do you prevent? How do we make those decisions that we are going to favor one particular interest group over another? As if there was a product that could be put out every decade, every 20 years that would determine, we're going to lease this or not.
Yeah, and I know that gets right back to and you're talking about the resource management plans. But there's a very big reluctance once those resource management plans are put in place to amend them at any point during that 20-year time
Because
frame.
it costs millions of dollars.
And you never know what the product is going to look like. You may open it up
If
for
only
a
were
one
private
purpose,
lands,
right? You may open
where
it up
you
for
could
one
go in
purpose
very
and-
quickly and make that decision without having to jump through. I'm just kidding.
Nobody's.
We-
But I mean, my point is your point, my point, all our points is that there is a document that makes these types of decisions that are learned. We take the time, we study it, but it costs money to do that.
And
NEPA
Right.
costs.
And sometimes we
money.
make those decisions before we know about the existence of a migration corridor.
or the existence of a rare earth mineral,
Right.
or some other thing that comes along. And we're like, wait a minute, actually, we can develop in shale.
And that's
There's
the argument.
there's
you
all
know, on
kind-
both sides,
Yeah.
for and against keeping the flexibility of the lease.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the bigger issues that overlays that is just, okay, there's a migration corridor for mule deer. Should we manage federal lands for one species? Or should we think about other species? Other uses?
It's a fair question.
Yeah.
But we do all over the place on federal land. We manage things for singular uses, right? We do it. We set up places. Here's where you can snowmobile, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Here's where you can mountain bike.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where. It's just
Right, and they're
we do it.
usually guided based upon the Multiple Use and Sustained Yield Act.
Right.
Because those resources that you're describing are not ones that are permanent.
From a wildlife perspective, we would have to say, if anything, this is my opinion, we would want everything to be as multi-use as possible from a wildlife perspective. Because as soon as we give away to this idea that we're going to cordon off, we're going to like, hey, let's use this one for OHVs and this one for snowmobiles. In my mind, wildlife loses because in my mind, because as soon as you start going, that route of saying like, well, this is a sacrifice area. When you start creating these sacrifice areas instead of saying, let's make sure that everything can work on it. I just don't buy that. I just don't buy that.
Yeah, I think that's another podcast.
We've had this argument before, but it's just,
buy it.
Yeah, I know, but it's just not true.
I disagree.
Well, we have
shocking.
So that's another podcast right there.
You do not have to. So my final statement this is my final statement. I'll shut up. Ready?
All right.
It's a false choice to say that you can either have breakfast or have a clean kitchen. You don't have to choose between the two, but you have to do both right. The idea that you have to that everything is a 1 or a 0 is just not true. Now that doesn't mean that you don't have concessions in certain areas, and some places aren't going to be better for some things than others, but you can do multiple things in the same area if you're responsible. But that doesn't mean that if your preferred thing is mountain climbing, there are going to be some concessions. It's not going to be as great for mountain climbing as it could. But the benefit of that is you're going to get to climb mountains in more places.
Yeah, and I'll say I disagree with you. I do think there are places
that's because
that are 1s and 0s. Maybe not as many as some people think, but there are places.
And I agree with that.
Yeah.
There are, but that's the problem is when you get into this thing where it's almost like this issue. Everybody wants to lease everything everywhere. Well, you'd say that's not accurate. At the same time, everything can't be wilderness everywhere. That doesn't work. You have to find a balance in these things, and you can find the balance, and it's worth finding the balance. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. I agree. But sometimes that balance is 1 and 0. But
I don't know. Self-licking lollipop.
Self-licking lollipop. All right. Well, we've beat this thing up pretty hard.
Yeah.
No one's even listening now.
I know.
Don't worry.
They got so
no one cares.
They all fell asleep when you fell asleep.
If you're listening to this, you're a loser.
No, you're not. You're awesome.
You're awesome.
We love every single one of you. If you made it through
this, you need to convince 3 friends to listen.
Yeah, that's a good challenge. I like that.
Yeah.
If you haven't, and we hear from people all the time that have said, "Hey, I told so and so about this," right? I've been telling friends about this.
Word of mouth is huge.
But for us, we don't run a marketing campaign.
No,
it's a word of mouth campaign.
Yeah,
we don't have money. We lose money to do this. Like it is costing us.
We are the
money.
losers. Yeah, we are the losers. There's no doubt. My wife asked me tonight. She's like, you're still doing that podcast?" I was like, well, yeah.
How much of my money have you spent on that podcast?
Well, technically,
all
I don't want to talk about
it. Every penny of it.
Yeah.
50%.
Yeah. When we say this is a labor of love, it really isn't. We don't love this.
No, it's more like it's just like a challenge.
No, but we depend on you all that are listening to help. If you like this kind of content, we depend on you all to tell other people that this is something worth listening to.
Absolutely.
We don't have a marketing budget or a marketing team. We all have day jobs, and we sit around late at night recording these things. And so we need your help.
Yeah. It's fair to say if this contracts, why would we pay for it?
Yeah.
So if you like it, tell your friends.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Just get 3.
Tell your friends.
3 people.
And if you haven't gone out onto iTunes yet and given us a rating, 5-star preferably, and leave us a comment, we'd really appreciate you doing that. Not only does it, from what we understand, from an analytics standpoint or algorithm standpoint, help get it, have it pop up for other people, but just from a personal ego standpoint, it really, reading those comments are good motivation.
Good for Dave's ego.
It's good motivation for all of us to want to keep doing this.
He usually only tells me about the ones that are negative.
I do. I kind of have fun with this.
And if you have one of these Audio Technica headsets sitting around, send that to us too, because we could use some more of these, and I don't want to pay for them.
Oh, Nephi.
Yo, just don't even say anything.
Can I-
You. No.
We're missing a basketball game right now to record this too
Dave's team is beating Nephi's team.
by almost 20.
Let's just say
I
that-
just looked up the score.
My team is not full of egotistic wannabe. I don't know.
Anyways,
Yeah, whatever. Anyway,
the team that's losing doesn't
help
have
us.
an ego.
help us.
Dave's a Lakers
What's-
fan.
what's that?
Everyone, he's a Lakers fan.
What's that?
How could you Oh,
What's that? That line? Help us, help you. Right?
Help,
You know?
help me.
Help me, help you,
That's
right?
right. Show me the money.
Yeah. Right?
Show me this
Show me-
subscription.
Yeah. So help us out. We'd really appreciate it. Follow us on social media at It's Your Mountain on all the various profiles. Send us an email. Give us your feedback that way if you prefer Your Mountain at itsyourmountain.com. All of that we really appreciate. We appreciate you sticking around if you made it all the way through this. Thank you so much. This is a little longer than we wanted to go. And we're back in the saddle again. We should be having weekly content again. So I hope we didn't lose you this past month. Hope you were out having as much fun as we were having out in the field. Because as you know, life is about experiences. So go have one.
Mine Shaft Willie.